Dean set down his whiskey glass and put his head in his hands. John Wayne froze as he heard the confession he never expected. "I wasn't a good father, John," filling the silence of the living room. Wait, because what happened in the next 4 hours would reveal the deepest vulnerabilities of two American icons and show that even legends struggle with being the fathers they wished they could be. It was well past 2 a.m. in Dean's Beverly Hills home, and the amber liquid in their glasses had been speaking for them most of the night. The house felt different when empty of its usual crowd of hangers-on and party guests. No cigarette girls, no backup singers lounging by the piano, no agents whispering deals in corners, just two friends in the kind of silence that only came after decades of knowing each other. Wayne had noticed something different about Dean that evening. The way he kept glancing at the family photos on the mantel, the forced quality of his usually effortless smile, the silence that stretched a little too long between his signature quips. Dean had been pouring drinks with unusual precision, measuring the whiskey like it was medicine he needed to get exactly right. They'd started the evening talking about the usual things: upcoming projects, mutual friends in the business, the changing landscape of Hollywood. Dean had made his customary jokes about Frank's ego, and Wayne had shared his latest frustrations with studio executives who wanted to turn every Western into a musical. But as the night wore on and the crowd thinned out, their conversation had grown quieter, more reflective. The Beverly Hills mansion felt enormous around them. Dean's house was known for its parties, for the constant stream of celebrities and wannabes who filled every room with laughter and music. But in the early morning hours, with just the two of them left, the space seemed to echo with a different kind of emptiness. The gold records on the walls caught the lamplight, reminders of success that suddenly felt hollow compared to the weight of what Dean was carrying. "What's eating at you, partner?" Wayne had finally asked, settling deeper into the leather chair that had become his unofficial spot during their late-night conversations over the years. He'd been coming to these gatherings for so long that Dean's staff automatically set out his preferred brand of bourbon and made sure his favorite chair was available. The question hung in the air, while Dean continued staring into his drink. Outside, Los Angeles slept, but inside this room, two of America's most recognizable faces were about to strip away everything that made them famous and talk like the ordinary men they'd never really been allowed to be. Dean had been quiet for nearly 10 minutes, which anyone who knew him would tell you was practically impossible. The man who could charm a room full of strangers into feeling like old friends, who never met a silence he couldn't fill with a perfectly timed joke, sat staring into his whiskey like it held answers he'd been searching for his entire life. His hands, which could conduct an orchestra with effortless grace or hold a microphone like it was an extension of his soul, trembled slightly as they gripped the crystal glass. These were hands that had signed autographs for thousands of fans, had embraced everyone from gangsters to presidents, had held women who loved him and children who barely knew him. "John." Dean's voice came out rougher than usual, stripped of the smooth crooner's tone that had made him famous. "When's the last time you really talked to your kids? I mean, really talked to them, not just asked how school was going or handed them some money." Wayne shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't like Dean to get philosophical about family matters. Their friendship was built more on shared experiences than deep emotional sharing. They were men of their generation, after all, more comfortable expressing affection through loyalty and presence than through words. "I don't know, Dean. Maybe last month when Patricia called about her college plans." Wayne's answer came slowly, as if he was realizing something as he spoke. "Actually, come to think of it, I did most of the talking, gave her advice about choosing a major, told her some stories about my early days in pictures." Dean nodded slowly, a bitter smile crossing his face. "That's what we do, isn't it? We perform, even for our own children. Give them the Dean Martin show, or the John Wayne experience instead of just being their fathers." The observation hit Wayne harder than he expected. How many times had he found himself slipping into the Duke persona when talking to his children? How often had he given them life lessons delivered in the same gravelly, authoritative tone he used on movie sets, instead of just listening to what they needed from their dad? Then came those 7 words that changed everything. The admission hung between them like cigarette smoke, heavy and impossible to take back. Wayne didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurances or dismissals. He'd learned over their decades of friendship that Dean rarely said anything he didn't mean, especially this late at night when the whiskey had worn away his performer's polish. Dean's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his glass again. I was always on the road, John. Always had another show, another recording session, another something that seemed more important than being home for dinner or helping with homework. His voice carried a weight Wayne had never heard before, not even during Dean's divorce proceedings or his struggles with Sinatra's volatile moods. Wayne shifted forward in his chair. Here was a man who'd built a career playing strong, silent types, men who knew exactly what to do in any crisis. But watching his friend's shoulders shake with suppressed emotion, he found himself in uncharted territory. How many of my kids' birthdays did I miss because I was in Vegas or recording in New York? Dean continued, his voice barely above a whisper. How many times did they need their old man and find an empty chair at the breakfast table instead? The question wasn't really directed at Wayne, but it demanded an answer nonetheless. Dean was talking to himself as much as to his friend, working through years of accumulated guilt that success had temporarily masked but never truly erased. Wayne thought about his own children, scattered across the country, some of whom he spoke to regularly, and others who seemed to view him more as a public figure than a father. The cowboy hero the world knew and loved had his own collection of missed recitals, forgotten school events, and conversations that should have happened but never did. You know what the worst part is? Dean's voice cracked slightly. They never complained. Not once. They'd just wave goodbye when I left for another tour and welcome me home like nothing happened. They were protecting me from my own guilt, and I was too selfish to see it. Notice how neither man had touched their whiskey for several minutes now. This wasn't a conversation lubricated by alcohol anymore. This was 2 fathers confronting truths they'd spent years avoiding. Wayne finally broke his silence. Dean, you think you're the only one carrying this weight? The question hung in the air, and Dean looked up for the first time since his confession began. Wayne's weathered face showed every one of his 60 years in the lamplight, but there was something else there, a vulnerability that never made it into his films. The Duke's famous squint was gone, replaced by an openness that seemed to age him and humanize him at the same time. Wayne stood up and walked to the bar, not to pour another drink, but to buy himself time to find the right words. He'd spent his entire career playing men who always knew what to say, who had the moral certainty to face down any challenge. But standing in Dean's living room, he felt more lost than any character he'd ever portrayed. You know, Dean, I've been thinking about this lately, more than I probably should. Wayne turned back toward his friend, bourbon glass forgotten in his hand. We built these careers, these personas that the whole world knows. John Wayne, the cowboy who always gets the girl and saves the town. Dean Martin, the smooth operator who makes everything look easy. He walked back to his chair, but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood behind it, gripping the leather backrest like an anchor. But when I go home, when I really go home and try to just be their father, I don't know how to turn that off. I catch myself giving them the John Wayne speech about courage and honor, when what they really need is just their dad to listen to why they're scared or upset. Dean nodded, recognizing something in his friend's words that he'd never been able to articulate himself. I counted once, Wayne continued, his gravelly voice softer than Dean had ever heard it. Really sat down and counted how many of my kids' Little League games I made it to over the years. You know what the number was? Dean shook his head, though something in Wayne's tone already told him the answer wouldn't be good. 3. 3 games out of maybe 50 or 60 opportunities. Wayne's voice cracked slightly on the numbers. 3 times in all those years when I chose to be Patrick's dad instead of John Wayne. 3 Saturday afternoons when I didn't have somewhere more important to be. The admission cost Wayne something to make. This was a man who'd built his entire public persona around strength, reliability, and unwavering moral certainty. Admitting failure, especially as a father, went against everything the John Wayne brand represented. But here, in the privacy of Dean's living room, with the weight of genuine friendship between them, the Duke was just John, a father who'd made choices he couldn't take back. Wayne finally sat down, suddenly looking older than his years. I missed my son's graduation because I was shooting in Monument Valley. Missed my daughter's first dance recital because we were behind schedule on a picture that nobody even remembers now. Hell, I missed Christmas morning twice because the studio schedule was more important than being home with my family. Each admission seemed to hit Wayne harder than the last. These weren't just scheduling conflicts he was describing. They were moments that would never come again. Opportunities to be the father his children needed, that had been sacrificed on the altar of career ambition. The studio always came first. Wayne continued, his voice gaining strength as he worked through thoughts he'd clearly been wrestling with for years. The next picture, the next paycheck, building something that would last. I told myself I was providing for them, securing their future. But the truth is, I was building my legacy and calling it love. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Both men sat with the weight of Wayne's words, understanding that something fundamental had shifted in their friendship. They'd moved past the comfortable surface of their usual conversations into territory that felt both dangerous and necessary. Dean reached for his glass again, not to drink, but to have something to do with his hands. You ever wonder what they tell their friends about us? Not the public stuff. Everyone knows who we are. But what they say when someone asks what their father is really like. The question hit Wayne like a physical blow. He'd never considered that his children might struggle to answer that question, might not have enough personal memories to separate the man from the myth. Dean nodded slowly. Recognition flickered in his eyes. The understanding that comes when someone voices the exact thought you've been afraid to think yourself. Remember this moment, because what Wayne said next would stay with Dean for the rest of his life. You want to know what really keeps me up at night? Wayne leaned back, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the room's walls. It's not the films I didn't make, or the parts I turned down. It's wondering if my kids know that I love them, really know it. Not because I provided for them, or because I was John Wayne, but because they felt it when I was in the room with them. The words settled over both men like a blanket of shared understanding. Here were 2 of the most successful entertainers in America, men whose names were known around the world, and they were discovering that success had come with a price they were only now beginning to calculate. Dean reached over and refilled both their glasses, but neither man drank. The whiskey was just something to do with their hands, while their minds wrestled with decades of accumulated regret. My oldest boy called me last month, Dean said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. First time in maybe 6 months. You know what he wanted to talk about? Not my latest album, not the shows in Vegas, not whether I could get him tickets to some premiere. Wayne waited. He could see there was more coming, and something in Dean's posture told him this was important. He remembered this one Saturday when I didn't have a show, didn't have recording sessions, didn't have anything on the schedule. We spent the whole day together, just the 2 of us. Went to the ballpark, got hot dogs, talked about his school friends, his dreams about becoming a pilot. Dean's eyes grew distant as he recalled the memory. I remember that day now, but at the time I was probably thinking about what else I could be doing, maybe returning calls or working on new material. I was physically there, but mentally half checked out, you know. Wayne nodded. He knew exactly what Dean meant. How many family dinners had he attended while mentally rehearsing lines for his next picture? How many bedtime stories had he read while thinking about early morning call times? But here's the thing that kills me, Dean continued, his voice growing stronger as he worked through the memory. He said it was the best day of his childhood. One Saturday out of maybe 1,000, I was absent. One day when I accidentally managed to just be his father instead of Dean Martin. The weight of that revelation sat between them, like a physical presence. One perfect day had outweighed years of absence in a child's memory, which somehow made the absence feel both less significant and more tragic at the same time. He told me that whenever he was sad about me being gone, he'd think about that day at the ballpark, about how I bought him a second hot dog, even though his mother said he'd spoil his dinner, about how I taught him to keep score in the program, about how I actually listened when he told me about the girl in his class who liked him. Dean paused, swallowing hard. One day, John, out of 18 years of being his father, one day was enough to sustain him through all the empty chairs and missed dinners. What does that say about the other 1,000 days when I chose something else instead? Wayne felt something tight in his chest. He thought about his own children, about the memories they might be holding on to from the rare occasions when he'd managed to be fully present with them. How many one perfect days had he accidentally given them, and how many more could he have created if he'd understood what really mattered? You know what he said at the end of that phone call? Dean asked. He said, "Dad, I know you were busy building something important, but I want you to know that day at the ballpark, that's the father I remember. That's who you really are to me." Tears were flowing freely down Dean's face now, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. He was trying to comfort me, John. My son was trying to make me feel better about being an absent father. What kind of world is that? Wayne couldn't answer immediately. The question hit too close to home, touched on too many of his own unexamined choices and their consequences. How many times had his children made excuses for him to their friends, explained away his absences, minimized their disappointment to protect his feelings? Listen to what Wayne said next, because it would become the foundation for everything that followed. Dean, maybe the real tragedy isn't that we missed so much. Maybe it's that we didn't understand how little it would have taken to get it right. Wayne's voice was steady now, as if he'd found solid ground in an important realization. What do you mean? I mean, your boy didn't need a perfect father. He didn't need Dean Martin to give up his career and become a full-time dad. He just needed one Saturday where you forgot about everything else and paid attention to him. Wayne leaned forward in his chair. The same way my kids probably didn't need John Wayne to stop making westerns. They just needed a few Saturday afternoons where I was interested in their lives instead of my next role. The observation hung between them, simple but profound. They'd been so focused on the magnitude of their careers, the importance of their work, the demands of their success, that they'd convinced themselves parenting required the same all-or-nothing commitment, but their children's memories suggested otherwise. Wayne stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights of Los Angeles spread below them. We spent so much time learning how to be the men everyone expected us to be, that we never figured out how to be the fathers our kids needed. It was a simple observation, but it cut to the heart of their shared struggle. The same drive and ambition that had made them successful performers had pulled them away from the most important role they'd ever play. Is it too late? Dean asked the question that had been haunting both of them. Wayne turned from the window. For some things, maybe. I can't go back and coach those little league teams or attend those recitals, but maybe it's not about going back. Dean looked up, waiting for Wayne to continue. Maybe it's about what we do with the time we have left. Maybe it's about calling them tomorrow instead of next week. Maybe it's about listening when they talk instead of waiting for our turn to speak. The conversation continued until dawn, two friends helping each other navigate the complex territory of late-life parenting. They talked about specific moments they wished they could relive, children who had grown up faster than they'd noticed, and the strange irony of learning how to be better fathers when their children no longer needed fathers in the traditional sense. Wayne pulled out his wallet and showed Dean a photo of his youngest daughter, talking about how she'd started writing him letters about college. Dean shared stories about recent phone calls with his children, moments when the old distance seemed to bridge itself through shared laughter or unexpected honesty. Stop and think about this for a moment. Here were two men who had spent their careers embodying American masculinity, finally acknowledging that their greatest failures had come not from any professional misstep, but from the simple human challenge of being present for the people who mattered most. As the sun began to rise, both men had come to an understanding that would reshape their remaining years. They made a pact that night to check in with each other about their children, to hold each other accountable for staying connected to their families, and to remember that their real legacy wouldn't be measured in films made or songs sung, but in relationships they chose to nurture. "We can't change the past," Wayne said as they watched the sunrise together, "but we can change what happens next." Dean picked up the phone and called his oldest son before 7 a.m. that morning, just to say hello and ask about his pilot training. Wayne wrote a letter to his daughter that same day, sharing thoughts and genuine questions about her life at college. Neither man became a perfect father overnight. The patterns of a lifetime don't change with a single conversation, no matter how profound. But something had shifted between them and within them, an acknowledgement that it's never too late to try to do better, even when better comes decades later than it should have. The weeks that followed brought small but meaningful changes. Dean started calling his children weekly instead of monthly. Wayne began keeping a notebook of things to ask them about, not just career questions, but genuine curiosity about their daily lives, friendships, struggles, and victories. Most importantly, they learned to listen differently. Instead of waiting for their turn to share wisdom, they began asking questions and really hearing the answers. They discovered that their children had grown into complex, interesting adults with lives that had nothing to do with Hollywood fame. The friendship between Dean Martin and John Wayne was already strong, but that night transformed their bond into something deeper, a brotherhood forged in honest recognition of shared failure and the commitment to do something about it while there was still time. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. The story reminds us that even our heroes struggle with the same fundamental challenges we all face. Sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is admit they don't have all the answers and ask for help from a friend who understands. The next time you're wondering whether it's too late to reach out to someone important in your life, remember Dean and John's late-night conversation and pick up the phone.